My name's Matthew Belanger. I'm the general manager here at Death & Co. LA. I've worked here the whole time we've been open. I moved to LA here in 2019 to open this bar. Before that, I worked at Death & Co. in New York for five or 6 years as a bartender and as the head bartender, and have been doing this professionally, bartending for 15 years almost.
Right on. So something tells me that Death & Company is the place that shochu has been on the menu for a while. And is that like a fair assumption?
Yeah, we actually, now that I think about it, when we opened in late 2019, early 2020, we had a shochu drink on the menu here. And before that, we've had shochu drinks on the menu in New York, going back, I think the whole time I worked there, so probably like 7 or 8 years, we've had shochu drinks of various sorts or with other spirits on the menu.
So is this something that you learned about when you were like through working at Death & Company, and then like how familiar with shochu are you?
You know, there are certain brands that have been marketed that are positioned like for cocktail use, like people have tried, created products or taken products that exist in that space and tried to like push them into the cocktail space really hard. I think I probably encountered it first there. So I worked at an izakaya in New York, and they had like a very, very in-depth shochu program and sake program. And so I had the opportunity there to like, work with a lot of products I hadn't seen, taste a lot of different categories of shochu. And that was more focused on the types of shochu that you would, see getting drank in Japan, or stuff that is more about what the folks in Japan I think are drinking than a product that's necessarily like directed at a Western audience or at me as a cocktail bartender. So
right.
In that context, I think it was kind of good to get both sides of that, to see like some, I've had some experience with larger brands or like very specifically kind of targeted products, and then like a kind of a cross section of all the different things that you might run into if you were in a bar, in Tokyo or something.
Right. I mean, I find it like so interesting that shochu is something that in Japan outsells whiskey.
Yeah.
It's insanely popular.
Yeah.
But it's only a very small percentage of like global sales.
Yeah.
And a lot of like American drinkers don't really know that much about it. So like when somebody comes to this bar and they're like, what's that? How do you characterize it for them?
Like obviously, we have conversations about like vodka, rye, or bourbon that are about the raw material. You're like, okay, you would say like, oh, bourbon's made mostly with corn, rye's made mostly with rye, vodka, you get all types of other things. So shochu is essentially a grain-based spirit where they haven't distilled it as many times and they haven't aged it. So rather than the whiskeys of the world where the flavor of the base grain is sort of secondary to the way that aging has imparted flavor to a whiskey, if you remove that entirely and say this is a spirit that's about the raw material and how it's transformed by fermentation with koji, and then how it's transformed by single distillation in a pot still or a column still. And so it's sort of like a more flavorful version of the base distillate that goes into, again, rye, bourbon, scotch, whatever, which is a bit of an oversimplification and potentially, raises as many questions as it answers, but
right.
at least you can contextualize it with something that someone's already familiar with. And then from there, you can put it in a box that they sort of are already familiar with, then you could take it. So I might honestly, like if you were a vodka drinker, I might sell it to you slightly differently, but essentially the same thing. The way that vodka is made from wheat or corn or sometimes rye, this is made in a similar way, but has undergone less processing, and it's more flavorful and it's more expressive of the original raw ingredient that was used to make it.
So you guys have 2 new shochu cocktails on the menu.
That's correct.
What are they?
So we're going to be running 2 cocktails with shochu on the menu, one of which is basically a take on a classic Chuhai, a very classic presentation of a SHOCHU Highball. Basically sweet potato shochu and sparkling water. The sweet potato shochu that we're using is Kuro-Koji Asahi-Mannen, which is a very flavorful, really rich textural sweet potato shochu. And the idea of that cocktail is just to really feature the flavor and texture of that spirit in a context that's focused on that ingredient. We're adding a little bit of a garnish to that, just to again, to kind of put some interesting context on it, to give it a aesthetic flair that's what you would expect from a Death & Co. cocktail, but it is essentially just shochu and sparkling water, which is one of the most traditional ways to enjoy it. So the second cocktail that we're serving is with Iichiko Saiten, which is a barley shochu. That one's called Double Vision, and that is more complex creation of the sort that you might see on the Death and Co menu in general. It's a sour, or maybe like almost a variation on a daiquiri. Has the Iichiko Saiten, lychee, honey, fresh lime, and fresh grapefruit. So again, it's a little bit more complex and more of an exploration of like what you can do with these spirits if you're going to use them in a drink that you might find on the Death and Co menu in general.
Shochu is something that I was familiar with, but not something that I was really intimately familiar with until we started this project. But just the cocktails that we've made in this video, and then also the cocktails that you've presented to me, just like blown my mind, and something that I'm really sold on. What are your parting words for people who are just, interested in expanding their knowledge and expanding their, experience a little bit when it comes to shochu?
The most interesting thing to do, or like the place to start, is to just take the shochu that appeals most to you, that tasted it on your own, smelled it, whatever. Try it in a classic. Try it in a couple different kinds. Try it in a daiquiri, try it in a highball, try it in like a martini or something, because these spirits have such depth of flavor and so much versatility, and they will reveal like different aspects of themselves to you in all these different contexts. So like you can really play with it in every single, classic template, and tasting it like that, it may suggest a variation, like, oh, maybe this daiquiri needs, lychee and grapefruit in it. Maybe this highball needs, a piece of melon for a garnish. So like, try it in the classic template first, and then based on like the other flavors that sort of come out in that context, like whatever you're smelling or tasting in that very simple recipe, then it might suggest, the more complex thing that you can build on top of that.
Yeah, okay, so, and there's one last thing. Because of its versatility, and because no two shochu are really alike when it comes to like the different raw materials that are made to use it.
Yeah.
What do you think the probability is that a shochu is like the next mezcal, like is the next kind of big boom in the bar world?
I think that it has many of the characteristics in common that have made, mezcal, and then before that, like single malt scotch, or like the real esoteric, really complex spirits of the world. Things that have made those spirits really popular and become really widely accepted, I think, is present in the category of shochu as well, which is that there's a high barrier to entry because it's complex and it's got a lot of depth and people don't understand it. The density of flavor is really strong. The flavor is present, whether it's like, savory or really floral, or even just like the sort of texture that you get from some of these spirits. They're complex in a way that, again, mezcal is complex. Right. So you have to certainly, play around and explore, try it in simple things that that you like in order to kind of get used to it and to understand it. But once you do, the world of shochu has so much, breadth and depth to reveal to you. I think that, that's very much in common with like the world of mezcal. It's like, no two mezcals are quite alike. They, two espadines from different places reveal different aspects of terroir. Similarly, two barley shochus from two different distilleries reveal entirely different terroir, and that's part of the fun of learning about the category. So I think there's just so much fun to explore in all these things, so many interesting drinks to make, and in that sense, it's entirely like the categories you described.
Matthew Belanger, thank you so much for having us at the bar, and thank you so much for this chat. It's been illuminating.
Happy to have you. Thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. Cheers.